This leader was on a fast track in her career, recently promoted to a senior level leadership, but she needed only to improve her decisiveness and executive presence.
Welcome to Season 3 of Conversations with Coaches. This is a stakeholder-centered coaching production where we believe everyone deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. I'm Brandon Murgard, your host for the season. This season, we go deep into our case study library to discuss the real-life challenges of leaders with the coaches who help them succeed. As an added bonus, we're giving away the latest installment of our Coach Case Study Library, which includes case study summaries, transcripts of each episode, and ways you can connect with the guest. Get your copy today at mgscc.net/case-studies. In this episode, you're going to meet Lillian Davenport, a seasoned coach renowned for her work in leadership and career development. Lillian shares the story of an area manager at a global retail company and her journey to leadership excellence. Through innovative coaching strategies and targeted assessments, Lillian guided her client to significant achievements in decisiveness and executive presence. Join us as we explore the insights and strategies that led to this inspiring transformation.
The client was Appleton, which is an international retail store. And they are establishing themselves in the U.S. and expanding their footprint. They actually have about 70,000 employees across the world. In this particular instance, the challenge was bringing on 3 new area managers. My client that I'm dealing with is an area manager who moves from assistant store manager, all the way to store manager and then area manager within a 5-year time span, which really put an additional complexity on it from the perspective of moving up from amongst peers to now lead peers and provide direction and strategy and everything that goes with it. So a little bit challenging to move from store manager of one to actually overseeing an area and managing other managers.
And how did they find out about you? How did they get your bio and solicit your coaching?
Well, I had been in a collaborative relationship with other coaches, and it just so happens that my name made it to this organization. And I made the short list of the coaches who were presented. And what was appealing about my background was the fact that just as this is a global reach company, I had 30 years experience of working with global reach companies. So in the US, but also having the relationships with those who were overseas as well. So being able to understand what's happening here, but also interact with leaders who were in other parts of the world. So that was attractive. It was also attractive that of those 30 years of experience, a good part was human resources. So I had already been dealing with leaders at various levels of the organization for a long time, and being able to understand the dynamics of people leadership, the nuances of people leadership, and would be able to bring that to the table for this area manager who was moving and expanding her scope exponentially at one time. So that was appealing, being able to help as well.
All right. So we have a leader in a very large retail firm, very fast career trajectory, and they get you into their world. What did that first conversation look like when you sat down with the leader?
It was an interesting conversation. She was interviewing me, and I'm glad that she was because she wanted to understand what is it that I would be bringing to the table that would be helpful for her. So, understanding my background, but it was not only understanding my background, but I wanted to understand her. I wanted to understand what her challenges were and how I could position myself to be able to provide her the impacting support that she needed and wanted to be successful. So it was a two-way dialogue. The interesting thing, we just clicked immediately, that it just felt like it was right that we would move forward. So it turned out to be a good win-win selection.
That is awesome. So we talk about her challenges. Was she real clear on what she needed to improve? Was that kind of a voluntold situation, or was she looking for you to analyze and give her suggestions?
That is an excellent question. In fact, the organization had done its own discovery process, its own needs assessment process that you can call it. And it was a combination of shadow coaching. So actually having someone, a leader within the organization, go out with the person that I was going to be coaching and observing and being able to give some insight to her. Also, the Hogan assessment was used. And the great thing is, I'm Hogan certified. So it was easy for me to say, would you like to share your summary results with me if you felt comfortable with that? And I could use that as well. The organization had also used another tool, which is the Green Line conversation, that also gave a glimpse into personality and determining what might be the areas that she would want to focus on. And as a result of that, the initial, I won't say voluntold, but it was kind of voluntold at the time. The initial voluntold was to become more decisive, which we know moving up in the organization and having greater scope and responsibility, you need to be able to make a decision and stick with it and be able to adjust when things may get off course. But it was also being able to match her style to those that she was leading. I listened, wanted to process what was being established as the target, but I also questioned. I wanted to understand based upon where Bridget, who is my client, was my client at the time, where she was at that time, what is it that she really needs? So I listened. And because of that, I decided that there was probably a couple of more tools that we could use, and we did. One was the YOS assessment because I needed to understand, why do you do what you do? How do you do it? And what do you ultimately deliver when you're dealing with your team? I also, because of being more decisive, I thought that it would be interesting to also have her understand, what are those saboteurs that are showing up, that are getting in the way when you may not realize that they're getting in the way. So with that whole wealth of information that we had, and that can be a lot for a leader to process. So it was good for me to be outside of her logic box, help her to go through all the information that was put in front of her and go back to her two original goals and decide, is that really what you want to do? Being what she wanted to focus on. Being decisive, more decisive was definitely something that was needed. But then she nuanced just a little bit and wanted to really focus on developing her executive presence. And as she was moving up in the organization, it just seemed to logically fit with her that if she could develop her executive presence, it was going to be an umbrella that would cover a lot of things that would be important for her. So she made a little shift, and that became our focus, those two goals.
So this is a high performing leader with a few things that, if augmented, is really going to make a difference for her. Was her perspective one of excitement that she's thrilled to just continue this development? Was it more, let's say, a little beaten down from the feedback and realizing that these areas are something that needs to change? What was her perspective there?
She was completely open. When I say that someone who's looking for knowing that there is another way to do things, and she was so ready to fully step into this next level and feel really confident about what she was doing. She was totally ready. So there was not a reticent or feeling beat down, very energized, very open to actually processing whatever came her way and giving some deep thought to it about how do I use the information that I am receiving from her perspective. How would she use that information to continue to elevate herself and become even more impactful in her role?
Let's get into a little bit about the process. What was her experience over the months of getting coached by Lillian Davenport?
It was a growth experience. I remember her telling me earlier when we first started, and we were having our conversations. So we met on a regular basis. And I say regular, it could be once a week, but with her traveling sometimes overseas to Ireland and to other places, it wouldn't always be once a week. But what we did do was make it a point that when we did meet, it was concentrated and very focused. So once we set, and early on, it was setting that action plan. How do you bring clarity when you get so much information and you have a couple of goals that you're working on? How could I help her bring clarity to make sure that she was advancing toward where she wanted to go? And the fact that you can't do everything at one time. So rather than trying to do everything at one time, choose that one goal, and then we added on a new one. So we thought that the greatest impact could be by becoming more decisive, because that was what was needed with her team to show that she could set a strategic direction and really help lead them in the way that they were going. Not being wishy-washy and not having to source with too many people to make a decision. She knew that that was an area that she needed to make a difference. And then we added on a couple of months later, the developing her executive presence as well. So it was meeting with her periodically after developing an action plan, because we needed that focus, developing that action plan, but also a daily checklist. There is power in looking at what you want to accomplish every day and not just once a week. And she really Bridget wrapped herself around that and lived with it, and it became her guiding post of what she would do. So it was engaging with me on a regular basis, but at least once a month, she needed to engage with those folks who were really critical, who was seeing her make this change at the same time. And so she consistently engaged with them on a regular basis. I never had to say, do you really want to check in, or let me urge you to check in? It was more like, okay, this is my week to check in. So let's get this done. Let me get the insights, the feed forward that I need to get. Let's process it, and let's determine how to shift some more. So there was not a let me pull you along. It was definitely more of collaboration. Very excited about it.
If we were to take a peek into that action plan or that daily checklist, what are some of the items that we'd see in there?
Wow, that's good. One was to actually be able to gather information from those who were knowledgeable about a particular problem situation, but make a decision. Gather the information. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. Don't overanalyze. And don't ruminate on the decision, whether you made a good or not good decision. And I deliberately really wanted to emphasize the rumination, because another one of the tools that we used was the How Women Rise book by Sally Higginson and Marshall Goldsmith, of course. And that was such a powerful tool, keeping in focus what our goals were, but also knowing what some of the leadership behaviors that could get in her way. That was a great way for us to bring her action plan to life and actually have examples and tactics and techniques to overcome some things that might have been keeping her from being her very best in both of those goals.
Excellent. And the daily checklist, for those of you who are listening on the road in your morning commute, maybe listening in at the gym, the daily questions is simply asking yourself a simple question about the most critical things that you need to do that day. And in our world, that's primarily behavior. It might be, how many push-ups did you do today? How many miles did you walk? How many steps did you take? But in the professional sense, it can also be, how many times did I say thank you to key stakeholders? And you simply measure this numerically. It could be yes, no, 1, 0. It could also be, if you're asking push-ups, some number. And you track this daily to see, are you actually fulfilling what you say is most important in your world? So Lillian, in your experience of using a daily checklist, do the scores typically start out the way that we'd want them in the first week, or is it more of a build up over time? And I want everyone to set their expectations accordingly with this. Lillian.
It's definitely a build up over time. And part of that build up over time is getting clarity about what question you really do want to ask yourself to help to shift the behavior. And depending upon how diligent you are in it, put it on your computer. She would put it on her computer and have it right up that she could ask herself, and putting the yes and no. So just so everyone has clarity on it, with the question, it is yes, no, not a maybe, but a yes, no, and you're able to very quickly see what the trending is and where your strengths are. She could see your strengths and what she was doing really well. But yet at the same time, we could also see what was happening that day that you had those ends. What triggered that behavior that might not have kept you on course for where you really wanted to go? And then be able to think ahead and do some feed forward about how do you plan for that so that you can self-manage and self-regulate as you're going forward.
And was she also enthusiastic about the daily checklist and the action plan, or did that, she liked it?
She was. And I think part of liking it is being process oriented. And because she was process and is process oriented, she found that to be extremely helpful to keep her on course and know that she was moving in the direction that she wanted to go. So again, dealing with the stakeholders and trying to change those perceptions and change behaviors at the same time, she was self-disciplined and wanted to make sure that she was doing those things that she committed to. Not that I committed or defined for her, but that she was committed to doing in order to shift that needle and move the needle.
What kind of challenges did she experience using the process, actually going day to day, getting feed forward, sharing her action plan? What obstacles came up through the coaching?
Some of the obstacles were for her that sometimes her stakeholders were not available, or the stakeholders were not as responsive as she wanted to be at the time. So that meant don't give up. It would have been easy to give up and say, well, I'm just going to pass that person by this month. But she didn't. Instead, She was creative in how she was able to get insight on the ready. So if she was in a meeting with someone and there was a minute that they gave her some maybe unsolicited feed forward about or affirmations about what they had seen, because they all had her action plan. They knew what she was working toward. They knew her goals. The stakeholders knew her goals. They knew her action plan. So it was very easy as she was interacting with them, just taking a minute and just saying, what can you tell me? And so anything that was voluntarily given to her as insights, she would jot those down. So there was not a month that went by that she didn't have some insight in some way so that she could keep making the adjustment.
Outstanding. That's exactly why we share the action plan, so everyone's aware. And you said something that I'd love to dig into, which is this unsolicited feed forward. That's how we know the process is really working, when stakeholders are comfortable to come and say, hey, I know you're working on this. This is the behavior you said you're looking to do. You've done a good job in the last month, but boy, you really dropped the ball in that last meeting. Here's what you could do different next time. How long, from your perspective, did she have to go through this process before her stakeholders started giving her that feed forward unsolicited?
I would estimate about 3 months, because it's not something, remember, that they're having to get comfortable also in making sure that when she would say it's okay to give me some unsolicited insight, that she really was okay with that. And so once that relationship was built, that it was okay, then she began to get that unsolicited on the spot, whether it was affirming or constructive, so that she could make adjustments.
It's easy to forget that sometimes, isn't it? You have a wealth of experience, well educated. Have you ever been taught how to give good feed forward? Has that ever been in the curriculum or part of the corporate training for you?
No.
It does. It takes months to get people to do it, right?
It does. And I think it's naturally because it's easier to give constructive sometimes feedback rather than the feed forward suggestions, because we're just kind of thinking that you can figure it out, or it might be so simple that you don't want to incorporate it. But with this, because of the approach that we took of incrementally making sure that Bridget knew exactly what the process was, and also educating her stakeholders, and for her being the face of her own leadership development, they became really comfortable in helping to give that feed forward and to her, instead of just looking at the past where she could not make a change on that.
Awesome. That's exactly what we're looking for with the stakeholder-centered process, is to get people to voluntarily share that. So again, we have a very high performing leader with some months of coaching with you. Tell us what happened. So we set out to fix these behaviors. We ran the process. What were the results?
The results were phenomenal, I would say. Of course, with the independent, objective, anonymous mini survey, except for her own direct manager, it was anonymous. And knowing that we could go from that -3 to a +3, her overall results were absolutely phenomenal. 2 goals. So the first goal being more decisive. The average was 1.86, a plus 1.86. On her developing executive presence, it was even higher. It was 2.0. And so when we looked at the overall effectiveness of it, she still received a 2.0. And the perception of how well did she improve in all of her leadership effectiveness, not just the 2 goals, but in everything, a good solid 2.0 on a 3-point scale.
Amazing. Do you recall what she scored herself? This is also just an interesting interesting topic of discussion?
Actually, as I recall, her alignment was pretty close to her stakeholders' alignment. So, sometimes you can have that an individual, especially with my human resources background, you see that either individuals will inflate what they think or they will deflate. It was good to see that the alignment was pretty close with what the stakeholders saw. So you didn't have that big gap in perception that would need to be managed.
Qualitatively, what did the stakeholders see? What did they notice, or what did they comment on in the mini survey?
Well, they definitely said that she had become more confident in what she was doing and how she was presenting herself. Also, the ability to make decisions and engage them and manage their expectations about what would be occurring. That was positive feedback. The bottom line was that whatever she has been doing, keep doing it because it was working for her. So it was a very positive outcome there.
Yes, I have a few of the comments from the anonymized mini survey. If I could actually just read a few of these, because I think it speaks to the transformation that took place, not just from the leader's point of view, but from everyone around them. So some of these comments include increase in confidence to address more challenging issues. I've seen the change in confidence in being more decisive. She presents herself as a more confident leader with a clear view and is not questioning herself, but comes across as confident and comfortable to make the most appropriate decision. She supports us with partnering the right people to help resolve issues more quickly. Bridget has stayed close to the process and appears to have built a great relationship with her coach. She chooses a good mix of peers, direct reports, etc., who are able to engage with and speak openly. This has in turn helped in getting the feedback she needs to develop executive presence and keep being the leader you have become. These are outstandingly positive comments from 5 different stakeholders. And of course, the names and everything are all anonymized here. But what you've done is really bring not just perception change, but transformative growth. So this brings me to my next question is, what were you noticing along the way working with this leader as she has transformed herself?
I noticed the confidence boost herself. It was amazing, as she had told me earlier, that when we first started working together, the thought of not working with me was a little bit overwhelming and daunting. By the time that we got to the end, she fired me because she was ready to really be able to fly on her own. So I saw Bridget, who modeled the behaviors that she wanted, that were effective leadership behaviors. But not only did she model them, she actually began to mentor her store managers so that they could begin to do the same thing within their spheres of influence. And we know that even from the mini survey, her impact that she multiplied her impact from the beginning to the end. So she did a great job of model, mentoring, and multiplying her effect throughout this whole process.
It's such a funny perspective to take to say, I got fired. That's excellent. It's standard for stakeholder-centered coaching, but tell me a little bit about why you feel so happy and enthusiastic about this.
Because number one, I know that she is where she wants to be, and she is having the influence and impact that she wants to have. But I also know that what she learned through the stakeholder-centered coaching process, she's able to spread the wealth and make a difference at the organization that she's at. And then thirdly, it's not a negative reflection on me. I see it as gee, you help someone to fly. And for me, it's modeling, mentoring, and multiplying as well. So it's just circular there.
Yeah, it's the habits, right? We don't want to be a crutch. We want to come in, help you establish the habits, and once you have those habits, you shouldn't need us. That's the whole point. I as the coach am not here to make you better. Your stakeholders are doing that. All I'm doing is help you liaise with them. I'm facilitating that. And when you have that down, you don't need me. So being fired in this case is a very positive thing. And I think, again, it speaks volumes to the impact that you've created for this leader. So you have a successful engagement here. Tell us, what did you learn from working with this leader?
Working with Bridget, I learned give leaders space. They know they know what it takes to be effective, to be successful in their space. Sometimes they just need someone outside of their own logic box to be able to help them to spread their wings a bit, to think beyond what's right in front of them, give them the opportunity to discover, to learn, and apply in a safe space. And I say safe space because it's good to practice in a place where you can have comfort, you can make some mistakes. It's not going to be judgmental, but yet you have an accountability partner who will whisper in your ear and say, well, what about this? And so you can do so in such a way that it maintains the leader's presence in a good way. The other thing that I think that I learned from it is really remain focused, help the leader to remain focused and fully engaged. And here it was, I could have started at the very beginning and let me just tell you all about this process from end to end. A high level view is great, but an incremental approach helps the leader to process, digest, not become overwhelmed, and not give up. And I think that was part of the process with Bridget, is that incrementally building up on the foundation was much better than let me tell you everything and become overwhelmed by it. The other thing, stakeholder centered coaching, I totally believe in it. I would say that for any leader, if there is an opportunity for you to be able to get insight from others that you work with, because it can get really uncomfortable if you were to just walk up to someone and say, well, just tell me what you're thinking and give me some insight on these goals. But if you have a process that you can really get some insight into what others are thinking, which is part of that strategic self-awareness, it is like gold. Because once you get that information, you can use it to bring out your best authentic self. So I would say be gracious in receiving the gift of feed forward, because it really is a gift and it can be used for that purpose. And then lastly, because I was working with a female leader, I would say is that just remembering that from a female leadership perspective, there are various dynamics that we're dealing with. So for mine, being able to really integrate in the Marshall Goldsmith Stakeholder Centered Coaching, and then be able to use the learning that was also in the How Women Rise book, it was priceless. It was something, the two tools really worked well together, that from my perspective and being the coach here, that I was able to pair it, because the end goal was to help Bridget become the most effective leader that she could be within the time frame that we had, and to use that time to the maximum.
I have a couple questions on advice, right? We have listeners who are HR executives, who are leaders looking to become recognized as measurably more effective. And we also have coaches who are listening in to understand the story. These are wonderful learnings you've shared. If I am a leader who's looking to be recognized as measurably more effective, what advice would you have for me in light of the learnings that you had from this engagement?
I would say demonstrate courage, discipline, and humility. And when I look at that, especially from a measurement perspective, I would say courage is the number one thing. Be open to being able to receive insights. And just like organizations have measurements, it is wonderful to be able to have a measurement that will show a gauge on how you are improving, enriching, enhancing your leadership effectiveness. There is no other tool, to my knowledge, that allows me to do that and to do it in such a way that is safe, it's also objective, and it's very clear.
How about if I'm a coach? If I'm a coach working in a retail environment, I'm working with a female leader in a male-dominated area, or I'm working with a leader who's working on decisiveness and executive presence. What advice would you have for me?
Embrace the process. Again, I think there is gold in being able to understand your colleagues that you're working with, embracing a process that opens up the space to be able to get insights, but to also help you to develop the habits that will help you to be extremely successful. So it's not something that I would say run from. I would say run toward it at full force. It's the best thing that has happened.
Lillian, it's always a joy to get to sit down and speak with you. Thank you for sharing this case study with us. If our listeners at home want to get in touch with you, follow your story, or just learn more about you, where could they go?
They can go to LinkedIn. I can be found under Lillian Moore Davenport there, or to my website, endviewsolutions with an S.com. nviewsolutions.com.
Lillian shared this profound coaching journey that showcased the impact of personalized coaching on leadership development. Lillian's approach, emphasizing strategic self-awareness and actionable feedback, offers a blueprint for leaders aiming to elevate their presence and decisiveness. Inspired by this story, we hope you're motivated to explore these strategies in your leadership journey. Remember, all the case studies of the season are available for download at mgscc.net/case-studies. That's mgscc.net/case-studies. The link is also in the episode description. And if you'd like to better understand the foundations of leveraging stakeholders and measuring results in your coaching, then join the free training program, Foundations of Stakeholder-Centered Coaching, where we share the philosophies and frameworks that guarantee improved leadership in 12 months or less. You can register for the free course at mgscc.net/foundations-course. That's mgscc.net/foundations-course. Until next time, this has been another episode of Conversations with Coaches by Stakeholder-Centered Coaching, where we believe everyone deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. Thank you for joining this conversation, and stay tuned for more stories of leadership transformation.